Hello everybody, welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. Today we're getting the transmission stuffed back up into my 2003 2500 HD. So let's just pick up where I left off, quick summary, right? So as I said, it's a 2003 2500 HD. It has a 6-liter gas engine and I rebuilt the 4L80E transmission for it. Now, it's a little bit better than a rebuild, in my opinion. I've upgraded it to red Alto clutches. Every seal, every bushing, every gasket in the transmission is new. The bonded pistons are all new. I also installed an HD2 shift kit while I was in there and did the dual feed modification on the direct clutch. So this transmission is, in my opinion, substantially better than it was from the factory. And I shouldn't have to ever worry about it again. I also am putting a remanufactured torque converter in it. Now this converter, it's a factory remanufactured, but it has an HD clutch and it is 300 RPM higher stall than stock. Now, a 300 RPM higher stall, you're probably never gonna notice it driving it around, but it should help just a little bit getting going from a stop with a heavy loaded trailer. So it's all prepped and ready. The torque converter I have filled with transmission fluid. I've made my marks here so I know when it was rebuilt. Everything new, all sealed up. And at this point, it's time to get it poked back up into the truck. Now, a couple things to do before you start putting everything back together if you're doing this. First and foremost, make sure your breathers are clear. You should be able to blow air into this port. It should come out through the top vent. It should also come out through the bottom. This is a vent / drool tube. So you need to make sure those are clear. It is not uncommon for that drool tube to get clogged up. You know, once in a while, a little transmission fluid burbles down into there. It'll hold some dirt, and over time, repetition, that'll cause a clog. So make sure you get that cleaned up. As I already mentioned, get your torque converter filled with fluid before you start putting things back together. And on these trucks, there's a few things you want to check underneath. So a few things to check while you're under the truck before you start putting the transmission back in. First and foremost, check your flex plate. These flex plates are notorious for cracking and having issues. So you want to look all around the bolt surface, all around this stamped surface. You shouldn't see any cracks or checking or anything like that. You want to make sure that's all in good condition, no cracks or no signs of any weakness or anything like that. If you have a higher mileage truck, this is a good time to replace the rear main oil seal. Now, I want to tell you that with a disclaimer of, if you've never done it before, do your homework. The oil seal, it's not like the older style 350s and stuff where it only fits one way and you can't mess it up and blah, 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 blah. You need a tool to help slide the seal over the crankshaft. And if you don't do it correctly, you can end up with a worse leak or a leak that you may not have had before. So just do your research before you try to replace that rear main seal to make sure you get it in correctly. And other than that, just a visual inspection overall. Make sure your cooler lines are in good condition. This is a good time to check your exhaust. Make sure it's not damaged or anything. Your fuel lines and evap lines, etc., etc. And then the last thing I'm gonna do, is take a razor blade really quickly and just scrape the block where the transmission mounts up to it to make sure I don't have any paint residue or dirt or grit or anything else like that in there that may cause my transmission not to sit flush up against the block. So I'll do those things real quick and then we'll roll the transmission under here and start getting it lifted back up into place and hopefully slid right up onto this engine. I almost forgot, one other thing I like to do on these engines and transmissions, 4L60 or 4L80. I like to smear a little bit of anti-seize around the dowel pins here at the back of the engine. These are notorious for the transmission seizing onto those dowel pins because you've got steel into aluminum and you know, that causes galvanic corrosion. So I smear a little anti-seize on there, and now I'm ready to poke the transmission back up in here. I'm gonna sit you guys on a time lapse so you can see how this goes. Sometimes they slip right into place, sometimes they fight. So we're gonna see which time this is gonna be. Okay, that went back together pretty easily. It's been my experience that the less time there is between pulling the transmission out and putting it back in, the easier everything goes back together. Maybe it's because it's just still fresh in your memory or something else, but went back in fairly easily. I've got all the bell housing bolts in, all the little brackets and everything, the fuel line bracket as well as the breather bracket hooked up, the dipstick tube is bolted in place. So that stuff is good. Next step is get the torque converter bolts all done up again. And something that a lot of people skip or don't know is you need to correctly space your torque converter. When the torque converter is shoved all the way back into the transmission, it shouldn't be contacting the flex plate. And what you really want is approximately a 1/16 to 1/8 gap of approximately 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch gap between the mounting pads and the flex plate. If you have that space, then you install your bolts, tighten them up, and you should be good. If you have more space than that, you can use shims, just washers, to help take up some of that gap. If you have less space than that, something's wrong, and you may need to pull it back out or figure out what's going on, but it shouldn't be that tight. With the torque converter all the way in the transmission, you should have a 1/8 or 1/16 to 1/8 gap. And then, like I said, make that up accordingly. So I'll get those torque converter bolts in, and then we'll get the dust cover, the torque converter cover put back on, and then the starter, and then the exhaust, then the drive shaft, then the exhaust, etc., etc., etc. So at this point, it's just kind of put everything back how you found it. Or in my case, if it wasn't quite right, put it back better than you found it. All right, everybody, zipping right along under here. Got the front drive shaft in place, dust cover, everything. Pretty much everything hooked up. I gotta get the rear drive shaft in, fill the transfer case with fluid, and then last thing I'll do is hook my exhaust up. I did get a new little gasket, this little donut seal from the exhaust. I don't want to have any exhaust leaks. And yeah, then it'll be time to get it lowered down and get it filled up with fluid. So I'm gonna keep going. I'll bring you guys back when we're ready to fill it up. All right, everybody, well, everything under the truck here is buttoned up. Got the transfer case filled back up with fluid, exhaust, drive shafts, cooler lines, wiring, shifter linkage, everything is all hooked back up and ready to go. So I'm gonna lower it down, get the transmission filled up with fluid, and then we'll start it up. I'm gonna let it idle for a while just to make sure it gets fluid pumped through all the passages everywhere else. And then once I'm sure it's full of fluid, we'll see about getting it out of here and taking it for a test drive. Well, everybody, I've got a good news, bad news situation here. The good news is I got the truck all put back together, lowered down, filled with fluid, and it has reverse, and it has drive, and park, and neutral, like it should. The bad news is I seem to have damaged the shifter cable when I was taking it apart, and the shifter cable is binding up. It will not let me shift through all the gears from the column like it should. So I had to order a replacement shifter cable, but not that huge a deal. The shifter cable is like 55 bucks and it'll be here in a day or two. So I'll get it on there and get it fixed and get it out for a test drive. But for today, I think I'm stuck. I'm done. I can't really do anything with it until I can drive it and shift it through all the gears from the driver's seat. So she's there, she's running, and the transmission seems to be working like it should. I just can't take it out for a test drive until I get a new shifter cable and get that fixed. So sometimes that's the way it goes. All right, everybody, so it's a couple days later. It's Monday afternoon. Why can I never remember the day? It's Monday afternoon. My new shifter cable came for the white truck today. I got it installed, and nothing fancy or special about that, just remove and replace. And the interior is all put back together. Everything's buttoned up underneath. Transmission is full. I'm gonna start it up and make sure it moves. Should start right up. We should have forward, we should have reverse. I'm not gonna be able to do a test drive today. I just don't have enough time, but we can at least start it and make sure it moves. All right, we have forward, we have reverse. I'm not sure why it took so long to engage into forward. Maybe it was just taking a second to get the accumulator filled up. I'm not sure, but like I said, I don't have time to take it for a test drive today. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick you back up when I do have time for a test drive. I'm gonna make sure this thing does what it's supposed to do. All right, everybody, it's the next day. Did a final fluids check on this thing because it's been sitting for a while, so checked all the fluids, everything else, and everything looks good. So we're gonna take it for a little ride. I'm not gonna go far, just up and down the road here. Just make sure everything's doing like it should be doing. Gear engagement feels good. Like, I feel like it's just firmly going into gear now like it's supposed to. Now, I am noticing that the shifts are a little bit more crisp, hard than I would like in this vehicle. If this were like a performance race truck or something that I was just trying to go fast in, like, I would want the shifts how they are. For my trailer tower, like, they're a little hard, but I'm hoping that they'll soften up a little bit as things break in and wear in and the clutches all get seated to each other, all of that stuff. But I mean, for the most part, this thing's running and driving just like it should. Transmission's not getting hot, which, I mean, the engine only just got up to temperature, so I don't expect the transmission would get hot. Going great. Now, I don't think I mentioned this earlier in this series, but one of the things that I didn't put a link for in the descriptions that I didn't buy this time is a torque converter. If you guys have been subscribers for a while, you'll remember a couple years ago I rebuilt the transmission in my 2002 2500 HD. I had bought that truck from a guy, and my original plan had been to part it out, but it was just too clean to part it out, so I decided to fix it, and it needed a transmission. And man, oh man, was that one a doozy. I wound up replacing the torque converter, which turned out wasn't the problem. I had put one of the sprags in the wrong way. But long story short, I had a spare brand new torque converter sitting on the shelf from that. So I used that torque converter in this truck. And I do think I mentioned it's a couple hundred RPM higher than a stock stall torque converter, which in hindsight now would explain why just putting it into reverse or putting it into drive, I didn't get that like immediate motion like you would expect with a stock converter, because it's a couple hundred RPM higher stall. But now with that considered, everything else, it's driving exactly how I hoped it would drive. I should get a ton of miles out of this transmission, and I'm gonna put some on it and I'll bring you guys back in a little bit. Well everybody, it's a little bit later. I put about 10 miles on it. Still driving fine. I'm not gonna push my luck any further for now, and yeah, I'm gonna take it home, get it all ready, the rest of the things I need to do to make sure it's gonna go through inspection this week, and then yeah, I'll have this one back on the road again, which will be nice. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing with me as I figured things out. And yeah, some other stuff coming, some other projects. I've got another one in the garage right now that I'm going back to work on and try to get it ready. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, take care.